So here's the thing that you need to know. At this moment, you're getting ready to embark on one of the more exciting 90-minute experiences of the weekend. What it requires from you is some real excitement, but what you have in front of you is a powerhouse panel of 4 remarkable individuals. And they are going to tell you stories, and they are going to bring their experience, and they are going to delight you. We are going to ask questions. They're going to give short answers. They are really, in this moment, giving you the opportunity to hear about what they do, to get a sense of how they made it to where they are, what the challenges are that they face in their work. But you will get the chance to talk to them individually after this session when they come visit your rooms. Are you fired up? There we go. All right, let's meet our panelists. Let's go. Tawa. You have to hold it close.
Hello, good afternoon. I am Tawa Mitchell. Thanks, guys. I'm Tawa Mitchell. I am a native Chicagoan, and I am a senior program officer, yes, at the John D. and Catherine T. MacArthur Foundation, where I have been for the past 9 years. My primary area of focus is in an enduring commitment, something that we are committed to for the long haul, which is making sure that Chicago, our hometown, is a thriving place. So we invest in people, places, and partnerships to advance racial equity and try to create a more equitable Chicago. MacArthur Foundation is a global foundation that happens to be based in my hometown. So we have a presence in India and in Nigeria as well, where we try overall to create a more just, verdant, and peaceful world. So we do that through a series of big bets where we, for a time-limited period, invest in large intractable problems, such as ending nuclear proliferation or trying to in the overuse and misuse of jails in the United States, or trying to improve our climate outcomes by lowering global warming by a specific standard. So things like that we consider a big bet. Our enduring commitments, like our commitment to our hometown, we also have a commitment to journalism and media. So many people are familiar with the MacArthur Foundation because of its presence on public radio or public television or advancing documentary film. And then we also invest in creative people who are trying to do extraordinary things in the world, and they are called MacArthur Fellows, or people know them as geniuses. So that's a little bit about my institution. Personally, I was in government for about 13 years prior to coming to the MacArthur Foundation, working on education programs and policies in the Chicago Public Schools, 2 stints in the mayor's office, and a variety of other kinds of experiences before coming to philanthropy. So I'll stop there. I have a wonderful husband named Mark, who's an avid cyclist and triathlete and engineer, and a 9-month-old daughter named Maya, a cat and a dog, and I will pass it on.
Hi, hello, my name is Meredith Bergstrom. I am a program officer with the Walton Family Foundation. I manage a couple of program areas, which I will get to in a second, but to give you sort of a broad overview, the Walton Family Foundation was started by the Walton family of Walmart. The foundation is a family foundation, so it is directed by a committee of family members. The family members choose to give when they arrive at 18. And there are 3 program areas all over the map. So there is an environment program, which is international in scale. It funds conservation of oceans and rivers. There is an education program, which focuses on improving K-12 education across the country. And there is a home region program that is place-based in Northwest Arkansas and 3 counties in the Arkansas-Mississippi Delta. That's the program area where I work. I work specifically on managing a portfolio of grants that's related to affordable housing, mobility options, so active transportation, cycling, transit, safety for pedestrians and cyclists. And then I also work on a program area we call Inclusive Shared Spaces, which is really about parks and public spaces. I come at this work from a city planning background. I've been at the foundation 4 years. Prior to that, I was never really aware of philanthropy as a field. I was working with an urban design and strategy firm in Miami, Florida, but traveling all over the country, helping design master plans for downtowns and comprehensive plans for cities. And that work has really helped inform the perspective I bring to the foundation, because I work primarily with municipalities in our two-county region where I focus, which is really interesting because, we talk a lot about nonprofits. I do work with nonprofit partners, but more than half of the grantees that I work with are actually municipalities and county governments. Personally, I also have a 9-month-old, and experiencing being a first-time mom, and I am also very into birding, which is just a thing that I'm happy to talk more about if you'd ever like to, which I really see as more of just a meditative way to experience our natural environment. So that's it for now.
1, 2, 1, 2. Oh, okay, it works. Hi, everybody. I am Kathy Garcia. I am founder and principal of Philanthropy Con Café, but I'm probably in your book as Director of Funder Community and Learning at Resilia, which I just transitioned from a couple of weeks ago. But they are a technology solutions organization that leverages the power of technology to support nonprofit organizations and really building their capacity. Prior to that role, I had been at Robin Hood as a senior program officer, which is a New York City-based foundation that works to support solutions to reduce poverty, and then have had a litany of different roles in careers in corporate philanthropy, at the City Foundation, at the Prudential Foundation, and have been really fortunate to do a lot of work at the intersection of economic and racial justice, and working very closely with corporate funders, but also organizations and other funders in the field to really do this work both in the US and abroad. Personally, I'm born and raised New Yorker. I come from a family of immigrants. My family is from Colombia. I am also a mom, but my little one is 11 now, and you may as well be a teenager. But I actually started my work as an organizer. I did a lot of work around environmental justice issues in the South Bronx in New York City. Never imagined that I would ever get to work in philanthropy. I certainly didn't know what it was, and if I did, I probably had something to say about it. But I was very, very fortunate to have worked under really incredible mentors and leaders who also never shied away from that background and that experience, and really helped me to channel that energy into this work. And so I feel incredibly fortunate to be here and to learn from all of you, which I will just say, the conversations that you all just had in the previous, I feel like y'all should be up here and we should be there. So give yourselves a round of applause. You're already well prepped for this work. So that's me.
Hard to follow that. This is how great you all are now. I have to be the last one to introduce myself. My name is Kevin Crouch. I'm originally from Los Angeles, half born and raised in Compton, California, other half raised in South Los Angeles. I heard a shout out over here, whatever that's about. LA, Compton, whichever one it is. Nice to hear you in the room. I currently live in Oakland and work in San Francisco, where I'm at the Bridgebend Group, which is a global nonprofit whose mission is to create societies characterized by equity and justice, which we do by advising philanthropists and nonprofits on their strategies for social impact, as well as doing research on the sector that we make freely available to the sector. I should also say that I had no interest in philanthropy, or really an understanding of philanthropy or what it was, in college or in the early days of my career. And really found philanthropy as a vehicle, really, for chasing what I was interested in learning about and the kind of service I wanted in the world, which started with the focus on education. So if I had to summarize my career, I'd say I focused on the study and design of human-centered learning environments, and started with the focus on young people in schools and the environments that they're learning in, and just realized, there's nothing wrong with the students, nothing wrong with the schools, and really something wrong with the systems in which we situate schools and students. And come off the assumption that systems are designed to get the results that they get. And so if we want different results, different outcomes, society where everyone can flourish, then we actually have to change the systems that control the conditions that make or allow these. So started my career in education, went to graduate school, again asking this question, like how do adults and systems learn in service of young people? And found that a lot of philanthropies are asking the same questions, and they characterize their work around answering these questions by supporting nonprofits on the ground who are doing that work. So I worked at the Hewlett Foundation for 3 years, primarily focused on funding and supporting education equity organizations. And now I'm at the Bridgman Group, still continuing that learning edge, but it's thinking again about adults and systems learning through the lens of funders and nonprofits. So if you're interested in working in philanthropy or in sort of like careers adjacent to philanthropy, that's kind of intermediary space, I'm happy to speak more about that, whether it's a question here or afterwards. So thank you all.
Awesome. The first question I'm going to ask here, and these are quick hits, about 2-minute answers, all right? And then also I'm going to remind you all, hold the microphone close because these mics don't pick up sound about 4 inches from your mouth. So let's go with, what do you each of you like about working in philanthropy? What do you like most about working in philanthropy? And then as you answer that question, could you maybe also think a little bit about the challenges you face? What's most challenging in terms of, like the politics associated with working at a big foundation?
Oh, I'm starting?
On this one, yeah.
Okay. Hello again. What I love about philanthropy is obviously helping to provide resources to advance issues, challenges, fuel successes in communities for people who often don't get that opportunity for the next innovative idea or sustaining work that is at the core of the sector itself. Everything doesn't have to be bright and shiny, which gets me to the thing that I don't like about philanthropy, but at the same time, there are institutions who, without the work that they do, or organizations without the work that they do, other work could not get done. So funding things that help to advance our goals, that's the best part, giving other people's money away. The not so great part is saying no, which we have to do more than we have unfortunately, the opportunity to say yes. We say no all of the time. And so it does something to your psyche when you're constantly saying no. I think the way to turn those no's into something positive is, looking at the through lines. Who are we saying no to most often? Chances are that there are Black, Indigenous, and other people of color-led organizations. And why is that? And what can we do as a field to change that? Saying no to organizations that don't have the infrastructure that philanthropy is used to supporting. And we had a wonderful conversation, shout out to the Blue Group, on fiscal sponsorship and, for example, and what that looks like and why it's more difficult in some situations to fund certain types of organizations other than versus others. And there are a host of other reasons why we may say no or we may say yes, but I think that's the hardest part of the job. Why are we saying no? And we tend to say no over and over again for the same reasons. And so with that, I'll pass it.
Yeah, so I echo a lot of that. I mean, I think what's really exciting to me about working in philanthropy is that there are just incredible people who are doing incredible work, and it's such a privilege to be able to say yes and empower people to do what they love and what they're really good at and what they can make impact in doing. And I've been on the nonprofit management side. I ran a small nonprofit for 7 years, and so I've been on the fundraising side, and I mean, it's just like so thrilling to be able to send that email or phone call and say, hey, all your hard work paid off, and we're able to give you this like really transformational grant that I know will impact your organization and the people that you serve for years to come. I also, like, particularly for me, just love site visits. So it was interesting when I came on board, then it was shortly thereafter the pandemic happened. So it was like sort of bizarre to be doing spending so much time in the field with grantees and then suddenly be doing everything over Zoom. And I think that really impacted our ability as a foundation to have a real beat on what was going on in the community. Obviously, it also compounded all of these issues that our grantees were trying to solve. And so it has been really thrilling to be able to do that again. And I think in terms of challenges, it's a bit interesting in my work. Our program area, so specifically the home region program that I work in, has a $50 million budget, give or take, in, like I mentioned, a 5-county area. So some of the challenges that we face are a little bit nuanced to that. So often we have a strategic plan that we're trying to execute on, goals that we're trying to meet in partnership with our grantees, and we have to think about, are we tipping this organization, which essentially means, organizations have to meet a public support test. So we're trying to resource really small nonprofits sometimes to grow, and we have to think about how to do that responsibly. We also are sometimes the organization that's saying, like, hey, there's this big gap in our community. Nobody's doing this work yet. And so we've started a lot of organizations, been sort of the startup grant. And that comes with its own challenges to make sure that the organization is sustainable over time, that we're not having an outsized voice in what's going on in the community. As the largest funder in the region, I think nonprofits can tend to sort of look to us to say yay or nay, and that can also be a really difficult power dynamic that I as an individual am constantly trying to sort of step back. So that's what I would say. Oh yeah.
Yeah, I think I echo what my fellow panelists have said already. I think one of the things I most enjoy about the work in philanthropy is learning. You really are just learning all the time. And if you are a grant maker who is, has your ear to the ground and you're really working with your grantees to kind of understand where they're coming from and just understand their stories, there's consistent learning. I love that I've been challenged on assumptions by my grantees, and I'm sure we'll talk about some of the power dynamics, but the power dynamic piece is a big deal in philanthropy because obviously, for better or worse, and as close as you might feel to the community, there is an inherent power where you are the grant maker and the decision maker that might impact the bottom line of a nonprofit. And so I think that that for me was that for me continues to be the biggest thing. And I've been very lucky that a lot of my grantees over the years have been my harshest truth tellers, my harshest, most loving truth tellers, right? They'll say, hey, Kathy, I hear you, but not gonna work like this, and let me actually give you a reason why. And so I think that relationship building has been really, really incredible. I would say the challenging part, which I guess is sort of related to the power dynamics and the challenging assumption pieces, I do think that philanthropy has built, the sector as a whole has built an assumption of a science of how it's supposed to be done. And I think that often the world's changed. The world's changed a lot in just the last 3 years, but it will continue to change. And so, I think that there are moments where as grant makers, we might make assumptions about what a particular community might need because of our experience. I'll just give a really quick story. When I was at Robin Hood, one of the initiatives that I worked on was a program called the Mobility Learning and Action BETS, and it was across 9 cities in the United States, and I managed a portfolio of work with community residents who were experiencing poverty, and a big part of our grant was to support them in the co-designing of the intervention that they wanted to implement over 3 years. I worked in urban, rural, and suburban communities, having grown up, born and raised in New York City, so my context of what poverty looked like was very different than what it looked like in coal country, Northeast Pennsylvania. But I walked in with a very specific assumption that, again, very quickly and lovingly, my grantees said, this is probably not the right assumption to be making. And so I wouldn't say it's necessarily a challenge, but I think that sometimes the sector is really hesitant to sort of take a step back and say, hey, maybe we're not thinking about this the right way. Or maybe there's a change that needs to happen here. And so I think that that has been sort of a tension. Again, as someone who has come from organizing, what we know to do is to just get up and do it. And then sometimes in the sector, it's sort of, we need the strategic plan, and then we need the research for 5 years. But I do think that tide is changing, which is also really exciting to see.
Yeah, thank you all for sharing that. I'm going to sound like a broken record, but it's okay because I like the sound of everything I've been hearing so far. And the first, what I love about philanthropy is that you really are just surrounded by just positive intentions. Sometimes they're going in the wrong direction, but the intentions are positive and great, and I just find myself constantly surrounded and engaged with just a vision for a reality that doesn't exist yet, but it's about a world where people are flourishing and happier and healthier and thriving more than they are now. And just a great kind of like emotional, kind of spiritual palate cleanser to a lot of the cynicism, pessimism, oh my God, we can't solve this energy that we hear in other places. One story that crystallizes for me is, so I used to be a fourth grade teacher, and after leaving that, I went to graduate school, then went into philanthropy, and came back to visit my students and was trying to explain to them what philanthropy really is. Like, how do you explain that to, 10-year-olds? And so I said, okay, give me all of your ideas for how to make school more fun, more engaging, like a better place. And they just shut up. Oh, we should do this. No homework. This or that. And so, so my job as a funder is to help you bring those ideas to life and to make them happen. And if they don't work, it's to help you understand, well, why not? What else can we try? And if it does work, okay, how do we get more of this going? And it's just a really, I think, powerful act of service that I really enjoyed. In terms of challenges, it's just full of tensions and contradictions. So on one hand, philanthropy is an exercise in plutocracy, concentrating wealth and power and using that to control where resources go. And at the same time, philanthropy is a powerful force for actually shifting and changing and transforming the systems that we're working in. And so without philanthropy, it'd be a lot harder to have a society full of strong, resilient, nonprofit organizations. And at the same time, as a philanthropist, you have limited resources in relation to the scale of the problem that you're trying to solve. So even if you're the Gates Foundation sitting on $10, $20 billion or whatever, the education system is hundreds of billions of dollars in this country, So you're always looking for points of leverage and trying to maximize your impact with limited resources. So you have to prioritize. You have to say yes. You have to say no to things that are honestly all deserving, which I think we found in the conversation we were having earlier. And so making decisions about that while also sitting within your values and ideologies and politics can be very hard. And there are harder jobs than that, but I think people often underestimate the difficulty of working philanthropy. Like, oh, you're just giving away money. And it's a lot more complex than that, which, again, you guys are all finding, and I'm hearing this in the real tension in the kind of discussion you all were having. So my thoughts there.
Perfect. All right. Kathy, you talked about learning, so let's talk about something we all love, which are mistakes. What mistakes have you made? What are the important lessons you have learned as a grant maker? And is there a grant you wish you would have handled differently? And Meredith, you're going to lead us off.
Okay. All right. This is great. I have a very specific, two specific examples. A mistake I made early on was not believing that I deserved to be in the room when I started. So I felt, I think all of us feel this, imposter syndrome, it's often called, when you're new in a space. I was new to philanthropy, and I just felt like, oh man, I have these amazing colleagues, early on, it was the first grant that I was presenting. Every philanthropy, every foundation does this a little bit differently, but there are some similarities, I'm sure. So in our process, we get an application, we've typically invited it, so we have a pretty good idea that yes, this grantee aligns, like we're excited about them. My job is often to sort of guide them to the finish line, and then we have a series of approvals based on the overall grant size in terms of dollar amount. So this grant was fairly large, and I was presenting it actually to our home region committee, which is family members themselves. I felt pressured to really condense my presentation. And I had thought a long time. I'd really worked on how to be articulate about this grant. And then I threw all of that out the window at the last minute because I felt like there wasn't enough time and maybe I didn't deserve to like take up that much oxygen in the room. So I just sort of rushed through like bullet points, and then the grant didn't get approved. And that may have happened anyways, but I felt like, oh, I knew what I should have done, and I didn't do it. So that's a mistake that I made. And so I just always want to say that, especially I think as many of you have graduated, like if you're in a room, it's because you deserve to be there and your voice matters. So just remember that. And bring your lived experience too, and trust yourself on that. And of course, like do your homework and prepare. But so that's a mistake I made. In terms of a grant, I would do differently. Another just quick story is that we often face this sort of like, we talk about serving versus leading. It also gets into this power dynamic. I try to be very cognizant of that. And so we often face this with grantees when we're like, hey, you're doing awesome work, we want to fund you. There's this really tightrope that we walk of like, how much information do I give you without telling you exactly what you should be telling me? And so we had approached a grantee that we had never worked with before about a pretty sizable grant and didn't give them a lot of information about like our own budget, how much we might consider in terms of a range of a grant budget. And they came back to us with a proposal that was huge. It was well outside what we had in our budget to fund for them, even given our $50 million budget. Honestly, it was like $10 million. And so it was really disappointing to them when we had to come back and say like, hey, the scale that we're thinking is totally different. And so I think I've learned over my 4 years now to be as transparent as possible without trying to overly direct a grantee's proposal.
I can go quickly and share two mistakes that I made quite often. One of them was not asking, it really is a simple question, which is like, how much does this really cost? Is a question that I did not ask my grantees for so long, and not realizing that the vast majority of grants are not funding the full cost of the work, and it's a very difficult. It's very difficult for grantees to be honest about that because they've had so many experiences where they'll get rejected for funding because they're asking for too much, or it's like, oh, do you need this much money, this or that? Like funders exercising, I think, too much oversight, and not enough trust in organizations. Yeah, and like being guilty of that, like purely out of ignorance, and just like making assumptions there. Another mistake is, I think, not fully respecting, to be frank and honest, just the time and energy that it takes to put together a grant proposal and to be waiting on an answer and funding that you need to sustain your organization, your staff, and your work. And so I just remember like proposals that were submitted that I might have taken my time to read, or emails that I didn't get back to as quickly. Sure, I was like busy doing other things, but I know that if I had thought about the people in the room, the people who are on the other side of that, in a different, I think more human-centered way, it would just encourage a lot more urgency, a lot more championing and advocating for their work, I think at levels that were greater than what I was doing before.
Kathy, Tawa?
I can go. I have one specific example, and I think assumptions is going to be the theme and the thread for me here. There was one particular, so the initiative that I mentioned earlier, we had so the way that the grant, that particular grant was structured was that we would provide 1 year of planning support so that the organizations could bring together coalitions of people and residents so that they could come together and co-design the intervention over the next 3 years. And for us, the data-driven piece was really important, but even more important for us was actually having community representation at the table, and not just like in a tokenized way where they show up and then they give their opinion or their thought and then they never hear back from us again, but we really wanted them to be a part of the decision making. There were two particular organizations that submitted their proposals. There was one that had some wobbly, the finances were a little wobbly, they were a little bit smaller, but their community tie, like they were deeply entrenched in the community. They were trusted as a pillar by the community, and people really gravitated toward them. And they had the eyes and the ears of lots of folks in the city and what have you. And then the second organization was on paper much better, bigger, stronger, financially stable. The board was everyone you wanted. The leader was an exceptional resume, fantastic. And my gut, I against my better judgment, I went with the larger organization. And what wound up happening was that it wound up actually taking us much longer to bring community to the table to work with them, because the community didn't actually trust them and didn't know them. And I realized at that point that I didn't do my due diligence, because I was only looking at these parts of the organization that seemed to look much better on paper, right? And that's not to say that the finances and the strategies aren't important, but I think that if in hindsight, if I could have done that again, I would have taken a step back and asked myself, well, what's the end goal here? The end goal for us was that we brought community to the table. And so the driver should have been, for me at that time, to think about the organization that was going to be trusted enough to bring people to the table versus choosing the one that perhaps looked, more ideal on paper. So I would say the learning lesson for me there is question your own assumptions, because we all have them and we come to the table with them, and sometimes they might lead you into more work than you would like.
All right, hold the mic, Kathy, because you're going to lead us off on this one, all right?
Okay. Oh.
And we want to hear from all four of you. You've been in the rooms. You know we have wicked smart young people in the audience. So the question really is, what is one piece of practical advice you would give to someone starting out who wants to work in philanthropy?
Just one.
Just one.
Meredith, I'm not to steer your thunder, but I love what you said about this idea of remembering why you're in the room. I think that is so critical. Again, just sort of doing a quick personal anecdote for myself. I come from working class immigrants, and the idea of even being anywhere near close to $1 million seemed like an out of space Jedi mind trick, let alone $100 million or $5 billion. And there was, of course, I knew I was hired because of my experience. A lot of it was lived experience, and a lot of it was the organizing experience I brought to the table. But it took me a very long time to feel even comfortable with just raising my hand and saying, hey, you might want to think about this way. And so I do think that you all really do belong in the rooms that you're in. That's why you work as hard as you do. And I don't mean to sound like a cliche quote. I really mean it. And I hope that you walk into these rooms with that same power and knowing that you already have all the tools to do this work incredibly well. And so just, sort of hone your strengths and sort of hold on to that. Oh, who should I pass it to?
Great. I was going to say two things. Now I don't have to say that one, which is focusing on your why. My piece of advice, it's hard to do in practice and something that you often aren't taught explicitly how to do, but it's really is about networking and leveraging the relationships that you have. And even when they're a few or several degrees removed, still considering that part of your network, because I think you might underestimate just the sheer amount of people who genuinely want to support you to find your way or your next opportunity or your next journey. I think about the Philanthropy Lab. This is my 4th time coming here, and I remember I found out, I think it was Bethany or Spencer, someone sent me a note on LinkedIn hey, you're new to philanthropy, we're doing this thing, are you interested? And I said yes. And it's transformed into one of honestly, a highlight of my year every year is coming and engaging with you all. And I've connected with so many students who I'm still connected with and still continue to advise and support in their work and things like that. I've had professors, I've had colleagues who have all done that for me. Even when I didn't know what I wanted to do or I wanted to work philanthropy, I knew what I was interested in, what my why was, and they were able to help me to find not only, a place I might land or where I might be able to do those things, but also connecting me with actual people who can help and talk to me. So I would encourage you all to do that. I might be speaking out of turn on behalf of the rest of the panelists, but consider us part of your network now. We are meeting you, engaging with you, and we will be more than happy to advise, support, informational interview, make connections where we can. So please use us.
I love that. I will also just say that philanthropy will be here, right? So do the other things also, right? Like volunteer. I was a community organizer also before getting into my career in government that I discussed earlier. But all of those things matter when it comes to the context that that you are using as your frame to make these funding decisions. And right now, because of the Philanthropy Lab and the wonderful job that they do, you are bringing in, based on my limited opportunity to witness your discussions, both all of these things now, right? You're looking at fiscal solvency. You're looking at the ability of an organization to leverage its relationships with other community-based organizations and other entities in the sector. How can their award from the Philanthropy Lab help them to attract additional resources? What is the organizational leadership of that entity, and how strong are they? All of those are lenses that we use in our day-to-day work, but some things are the intangible things. That mix of qualitative and quantitative worldview and sort of impact are the things that one can't measure. Well, obviously they can be measured, that's why they're called that. But you know, those sort of intangible skills and context that is needed to be successful in this work. So if you thought about AmeriCorps or the Peace Corps or making you know, pittance at some nonprofit, unfortunately, go do it, because now is the time that you're going to be able to do things like that, and that expertise and that knowledge it's invaluable. So while I encourage you to join this field, we need you. We need your brilliance and your minds and your perspective. I also say, we'll be here. It can wait. And do the other things. Teach, volunteer, work at a nonprofit, go to that policy think tank, go to the research institution, do the other things that are philanthropy adjacent, and also like contributing factors to the work that we do every day, because that knowledge will be invaluable as you try to mitigate the power dynamic, as you try to recall and put yourself in those empathetic shoes, as we were talking about, of our potential applicants and awardees. So you've got time. And our role as a sector is to really advance the things or help build the knowledge, as has been said, that others cannot do, right? When you're in government, you're using taxpayer dollars. Nobody wants you to experiment or test or think, because you don't have that kind of time. And you are often operating in 4-year cycles, but that's actually where the real money lies, right? So it's our job to test, to innovate, to study, so that things can go to scale, so that we can take bigger bites of that elephant and really move these historical and sort of intractable problems forward. And so that means that there will always, unfortunately, likely be a need for our sector to continue and exist. So we need people who have that experience, lived, practical, and otherwise, to bring those ideas to the sector, so we're not making the same mistakes in philanthropy over and over and over again.
Hear, hear. I have two things that are sort of in tension with one another. So the first is, don't be afraid to get really proximate to the work, like really close to it. I think it can feel like, to maintain objectivity, you don't want to overly invest, like get so emotionally invested that you lose your objectivity. I think that is like hogwash. Like, like absolutely, to know the impact of these organizations that you are potentially funding, you need to be like on the ground as much as you can. You need to be like learning from the people who are impacted by the organization. So that feels like something that was hard for me to begin with. I wasn't sure about that. And so then I will say, intention is make sure that you are never overpromising. So I think depending on your personality, mine can be like, I'm very optimistic, I'm very enthusiastic. Enthusiasm can be misinterpreted in our field. Yes. And so I have to work really hard to just provide like 1,000 disclaimers. Like, I want to be here, I want to learn from you. I don't think that I know more than you because I am the funder, but I also just like am very clear from the beginning that nothing is approved until it's approved. Amen. And yeah, nothing is approved until it is approved. And so I never want to get into a situation where a grantee is like, oh my gosh, we've got this money. And then I say, hey, I'm so sorry that you misinterpreted my enthusiasm, or that something I said indicated that you were going to receive funding, because that is just like the worst thing that could happen, I think.
Build on that. Yes. This is such an important point, because so many things in philanthropy you'll hear us say are in tension with one another. And one of those things is the way that the field is changing that Kathy brought up, right? So we our MacArthur is part of a true cost project that I was speaking of earlier, where we are trying to work with other large philanthropies nationally to try to expose the true cost of doing business as a nonprofit, and the indirect costs being much, much, much higher to keep the lights on, to keep your people hired, to keep the copiers working, et cetera, than in philanthropy we like to pretend that it costs. We are also in, there are common apps in the university system, but not so in philanthropy. There's an adage in our field, if you know one foundation, you know one foundation. So I may ask people to rub their belly and scratch their head, and she may ask people to stand on one leg and extend one arm, right? And nonprofits become nimble at doing the dance for each of us, because we all require different dances. And so that's not okay. But to win in this game, you do need to be financially solvent. Typically, you do need to have a balance sheet. You do need to have ethical practices. We now ask, as part of our application process, in addition to audits and tax letters and filings, we also ask, has your organization been in the media? Is there any reason why we should be reading about your nonprofit because of sexual harassment allegations or being rude? You may be great in the community, but people hate working for you, and they are plotting against you or talking about you online. All of those things we care about at the MacArthur Foundation, because that's our reputation too. That's our imprimatur when we are funding organizations. And there are all these other things that we ask. The challenge becomes that those are the sort of hurdles that many organizations speak to as the challenge with unlocking the secret sauce of granting money or receiving money that we are trying to give out. And so there is a balance between holding the hand and encouraging organizations to actually have your you-know-what together, right? Like, it's not okay not to file your taxes. It's not okay not to treat your staff with respect and dignity, to overwork them, right? I mean, obviously there's a grind in the social justice sector, and people do this work out of passion and love, but it doesn't mean that they shouldn't be compensated fairly. And so there's so many other things about nonprofit infrastructure that's like a whole other conference unto itself. But I think it's important that we try to do both things at one time, like both walk and chew ground from and encourage our grantees to be the organizations that we know they can be, and also encourage them to challenge us about the ways that we have them jump over hurdles and through hoops. So I just wanted to build on that point because it's such a living tension that I think we all face.
Can I build on that? Awesome. And Tao, I want to build on your point a little bit because just in terms of a practical piece of advice, because I think you bring up a great point that a lot of what being in this role means is being comfortable with being in tension all the time. And to that point, I think it's also really important that, +1 to doing all the things, because now's the time when you'll have the time. But then when you're ready to go into philanthropy, really do your research around the foundations that you want to work for and the values that you are willing, that you can have some flexibility on, and then the ones that you don't. And that's because it's, and that's the, foundations have varying levels of comfort for some of these issues. And that's no shade to them, but some might be constricted by the levels of, perhaps red tape or internal bureaucracy, and others might have a little bit more flexibility to do some of the things that you might want to see sort of done and funded. So I just also caution folks that, to get really granular with yourself around what's important to you, and as you think about your role in philanthropy, what is it that you want to be able to say you've done in that role, and then try to find institutions that might be really aligned with those goals for you.
It's very true. My grandmother used to say, everything ain't for everybody, right? And this is an example of that, right? And I think it definitely depends on the foundation and what it aims to do. And all money is not good money, right? And so even for nonprofit organizations, some organizations are better, some organizations are better suited to be funded by some foundations because of the sort of perspective that they have that Kathy is spot on about. And I think also, things move at different scales and different paces, right? So some money is better for startups, for innovation, for launching. Some money is better for the ground game of organizing and policy and advocacy. Some money is better for, taking something from national to international, or from local to regional, or regional to national, right? And so I think it's important to get all of that experience, and you can do that in philanthropy, but you can also do it in other aspects of the social sector. Excellent point.
All right, terrific. We're going to move to some questions that students have posed here on the app. I have a couple students who are asking a question about working with nonprofits who are located abroad versus nonprofits located within the U.S. How is that different, and what unique challenges exist? And Kevin, can we start with you, because I've yet to begin with you yet?
Oh, sure. Yeah, I can speak to this a bit. I mean, there are like some operational challenges to funding nonprofits overseas, just like legally, like there are considerations there. Oftentimes, sometimes the nature of a problem looks different in a foreign context. We're just like civil society, politics, government, the way systems are designed or structured, and their level of development just look different. And so the theories of change that you might have in an international context, or a context that's not the U.S., can be very different than what you're seeing here. So that's like one sort of strategic challenge that you'd have to confront, and not assume that all problems look the same, so all solutions look the same. Another challenge I think related to that is that if you're based in the U.S., then unless you're an enormous foundation that have devoted specific resource to that, you probably don't have staff on the ground in these countries. And so by proxy, you have to work through proximate organizations and local organizations there, which are hard to find, hard to identify, hard to diligence, hard to build relationships with. And so that's not a reason not to support or fund these organizations, but it's a consideration you have to make and think about strategically and put resources behind. I'll pause there and let the others.
Anybody else? All right. right, good, Kevin, you aced that question. Well done. Yeah, we're gonna go. This individual has embraced their inner Texan as they pose this question. How do y'all determine? How do y'all negotiate the act of giving to administrative costs, such as staff, versus giving directly to program costs? And then what about when the two overlap?
I'll start. I spoke a little bit about the project that we're embarked upon as a foundation with other foundations to have a sort of Gen App for philanthropy and for general operations, and then to sort of say what are the basic questions that all of us tend to ask, and then how can we work together to sort of get that from organizations, applicants, and not ask them for that, and what kinds of organizations can we all like agree to share in a common space. That work is ongoing, and I don't own it, but I think it's a testament to the responsibility that MacArthur takes in terms of the field and trying to make things easier. We're also trying to do that in-house and trying to do more general operating support, which basically means that you are providing support for an organization to use the resources however they see fit. And we've done that in to various degrees of success in different sort of strategy lines within the organization, but trying to take a global view within our own institution about how we might do more of that. But typically, philanthropies have different tools in their box. You know, we have impact investment, which are like low-cost loans for organizations to be able to resource things and pay that capital back in a very patient and sort of forgiving way that they couldn't get in the general marketplace. We have general operations funds, as Gen Op funds. As I mentioned before, we have project grants that are for a specific thing, right? United Way does a whole bunch of stuff, for example, but we might fund them to do a very specific thing, and we consider that to be project funding. And then we have something we call expedited grants, which are only up to $50,000 or so, and they are to do very quick, it's a quick application process and it's a quick response process on our side, but using all of the tools in the toolbox based on what the need is and what the organization is and what it is that they're trying to accomplish. Every foundation is different, as you heard me say before, so they have different tools in their box that they may use, but we try at MacArthur at least to employ a variety of tools. And some things we do in partnership with others, like we may create a pool fund or a donor advised fund where we might try to address a huge issue, but even $10 million on the table wouldn't do it, right? So like, how can I put my 10 with your 10 with your 10 to really try to make a bigger impact? So it just depends is the short answer. But using all the tools that you have at your disposal and sometimes creating new ones to help solve a problem.
I'll just build on that. An important distinction for me as I've thought through this, because we spend a lot of time on this, and MacArthur Foundation is really leading the way. Like this, what you just heard from Tawa is like we've been reading about that at the Walton Family Foundation, trying to like do better. So, but one thing I like to think about or keep in mind is that most nonprofits only think about this difference because funders are asking them to. Mm-hmm. They don't think about their budget. They don't split their own budgets for admin and program. At least I don't think most do. They know that it's like, this is what it takes to do the work. And if they're like responsible organizations with good staffing structures, like this is what it takes to do the work. We are the ones sort of, I hate to say it, like artificially imposing those categories onto their work and asking them to define their budgets in those ways. And it's for good reasons, but that's why this work is so important. And so we also at the Walton Family Foundation recently raised our indirect cost cap, and we also gave specific language to our grantees about what to consider indirect. So if it is program related, don't put it in the indirect costs. if it's like your staff time, if it's like you have to have an office on the ground in order to provide X, Y, or Z services, that is not indirect. Indirect is literally only things like an admin fee if it's a fiscal sponsorship or something like that.
I'll just add one quick thing, I think, and I agree with both of your responses. I think it also just depends on the context of the organization and where they are at. At Resilia, when I was director of Funder Community Learning there, the vast majority of the organizations that we served have had budgets of under 1 million and staff of less than 10 people. And so that's also the vast majority of nonprofits in this country. And if we think about administrative costs as a grant to those organizations, that would be more catalytic funding because it would then allow them to execute on the programs. And so then when they execute on the programs well, because they have the staff to do it, now they can probably leverage more programmatic dollars. So I think part of it too is like thinking about where the organization is in their growth trajectory, and then, you know, figuring out what might be most catalytic and impactful for them at that moment.
This too is just such an important point, but I believe it's safe to assume that most nonprofits are not spending enough on indirect costs and overhead. In part, as I said, it's because funders don't fund overhead or indirect costs as often as they should, and they often privilege organizations that have lower overhead costs or lower indirect costs. And the reality is that, you know, what you need in terms of indirect costs can vary depending on the context of your organization, what you're trying to accomplish, et cetera. And so one adage that I've heard from a colleague recently is that if you were to choose a nonprofit based on who has the lowest overhead rate, it's like choosing an airline based on who spends the most, who spends the least on maintenance. Like, is that really a plane that you want to fly? Like, no.
I'm using that
Right?
in everything.
Yeah. And so like these overheads, it's like it's not sexy, but if philanthropy is not funding this, then who would, you know? What are organizations supposed to do without this?
And I just want to say this means so much to our institution. Like we fund, we had a program called the Macy's, the MacArthur Award for Creative and Effective Institutions, and it was almost like a genius grant for our. For nonprofits. Don't quote me because that's not how. I'm just trying to use like. Yeah, it's not official messaging, and the program has effectively ended, but it was to help organizations build cash reserves for this main reason. I didn't tell my origin story, but I was an AmeriCorps Vista member at a now defunct nonprofit that really is responsible for community policing and bringing that to the mainstream consciousness, not just in Chicago, but in other places in the nation. And that organization, it's not like we don't need community safety or we don't need organizing in certain neighborhoods or how to do grassroots problem solving around issues of crime and disorder, but that organization fundamentally could not run itself, right? And if I were like in hindsight, again, don't quote me, I know we're filming, but this is horrible. I loved those people and I really admired them because they were geniuses, honestly. But it was a lesson. That's what one of the things that inspired me to go to graduate school, because it was a lesson in sort of how not to run an organization, why you can't be overly reliant on one type of funding versus another. And it doesn't matter how great the work is or how necessary it is if you're not running an effective nonprofit. And regardless of the nonprofit industrial complex or what it is or what it isn't, we live in the United States of America. We have certain laws and there are certain ways to do things. And unfortunately, so many of nonprofits fall into this trap, as Kathy was saying. Most nonprofits are small, but and some are not even intended to grow over time. But for wherever they are, there are certain fundamentals that need to be in place if they anticipate being around for the long haul. And I think you all are asking the great questions in your group to ensure that, because how would you feel if you spend $50,000 of this money that everybody in this room has an organization that they've put forward that's deserving, and in 3 years from now and 5 years from now, that organization is no longer there, unless they were set up to do that. Some organizations are set up to expire, and that's an okay thing too. But if it's not, it's a problem, and it's a problem we face in the field. And we as philanthropy have a role to play. We have a responsibility to keep that from happening. And so I'm passionate about this. MacArthur's passionate about this, and I just want to say that.
Okay, so we have 12 minutes now. It just flipped. And I have questions are flying in. And we're going to try to get as many questions as possible. So this is my challenge. This is now the quick fire round, all right? We're going to work out. Here's the first quick fire question. When deciding which organizations to fund, how do you differentiate between trusting your gut and being swayed by your biases? Quick fire. Quick fire.
I'm going to defer to the active grant makers here, so I'm not going to answer this question. I'll leave this to you three.
I'll start. I rely on my colleagues, so that's why I love working on a team. So I mean, I definitely go to the panel, right? I go to my colleagues, and I don't just try to. So I rely on them to temper my own biases.
Yeah, I would say that that's definitely one for me as well. I think the other thing is that I am relentless about asking myself what the goal of this particular grant and partnership is, and then making sure that I am, regardless of my biases, that I am setting up the organization and structuring this grant in a way that allows them to get to that place, whatever that end goal is, whether it's scaling a program or building the infrastructure, because I think having that clarity helps give me like an anchor when everything else is sort of all over the place.
Pass.
Quick fire number 2. What do you do in a situation in which an organization has a really great moving mission, but the leadership is poor?
I feel like I keep. Okay. No, you should. Sorry, I mean, this might be like different than my colleagues. I'm super curious, but I say like no go.
I would say the same. One of our criteria that we would use is like leadership background and credibility. If you don't have faith in the leadership, then it's hard to have faith in the organization or its future potential. So I would want to understand what's underneath that, like what makes this a poor leader, where is that coming from? But they probably wouldn't receive a grant because there are other nonprofits who have all these other assets in place, including a great leader, that are probably more deserving potentially.
And I'll build on that. I think. We've talked about like systemic disparities. In Northwest Arkansas, we have history of racism and really systemic issues we have to grapple with. So if there is one organization and they have leaders of color and there are issues there, then yes, it is absolutely beholden on us to go deeper and figure out, is there something that we can do to resource that leader, to help them? Was there an actual sort of like corruption issue or something like that? In which case, does the board need to get involved and change the leadership? So I think there are ways to dig deeper, but short answer is no go.
And I think, like everything in philanthropy, it depends, right? Is the leader one of those people that is very like narcissistic and they're the only person talking and taking up space and their team is not, and they're the ones doing the work? Like, are you funding something and then in 3 months the leader's there but all their staff just turns over and over and over? I think it just depends on the case of the leadership and what it is that they're presenting and why they're presenting it. If they're not qualified or if it's some other reason, I think those are also things to be considered. But the short answer is it really does depend. But it's a horrible, horrible situation to be in, and it happens too often.
For those who have worked, quick fire was this number 3. For those who have worked or currently work for family foundations, do you feel any sort of additional pressure from the family members to best allocate money or make organizational decisions? Are we coming to you, Meredith?
Yes. The answer is yes. So that is a really important distinction, I think, between living donors and legacy foundations. We are absolutely beholden to the strategy that our family members set, which happens about every 5 years. So every 5 years, we update our strategy, and then there is a lot of autonomy within the teams. So we have a director of our program and a director of the whole foundation, and largely approvals happen there. But it is definitely, as I've been observing you all today, I think what's so challenging is you all have brought these amazing organizations, and you're operating without a general set of strategy guidelines, which is what I have to work on every day. Every grant, I have to say, how does this fit our strategy, and how is it hitting our what we call KPIs, key performance indicators? So I am not bringing forward grantees that I like. I'm bringing forward grantees that are meeting our strategic goals.
Which is both frustrating and also liberating.
Yes. Say that again.
I'm just saying it's frustrating and liberating at the same time. It's that tension that we talk about in philanthropy, because, I do want to fund everybody because I am that person, but I can't. And so the strategic guidelines help us keep our jobs and do the right thing and fund the right things.
I can speak to this briefly. I've worked at a legacy family foundation and now work at a firm where we advise family foundations, and just have seen the difference. And it does depend on the foundation, because foundations can kind of do whatever they want within IRS guidelines. But for example, at Hewlett Foundation, the board there exercise primarily broad, strategic directional guidance, and then fiduciary guidance. But they defer to staff on grant-making decisions, so they don't review individual grants. And as core principles and values, don't step on the toes of staff. Whereas at family foundations, oftentimes the living donors just carry a lot more weight and honestly too much power sometimes in the room. And you see staff, everything is oriented around what does the donor think. And the donor can change their whims like this, instantly. They can say they're going to fund something one day, change their mind the next. Or you might be convinced and all of the rubric and criteria check out, but the donor might say, yeah, I am not feeling this. And oftentimes you don't have, there's not much you can do if that donor is not open to listening or changing their minds, et cetera. So it can really vary, but that can be a challenge that you can encounter in working with a living donor family foundation.
Oh, sorry. And I don't work at a living donor, but I have lots of friends in philanthropy now that I'm 9 years in. And what I will say is sometimes that all of this is true. And sometimes it's so quick because they don't have to do all the things that we have to do, they have different rules. So sometimes if you need somebody who needs $150,000 tomorrow and they don't want to wait on our quarterly process and our rainbow charts and our this and our that and our legal whatever, literally, I won't pick any families in Chicago, but somebody can just say, you know what, take this $150,000 and go do the thing in ways that we can't. So they can often act nimbly when we cannot.
I'm going to call an audible here because we may go a little bit over. This question is an important one, and I want to make sure we give it the time. So the quick fire round is now closed. But I'm interested in this because the students posed a really interesting question. As a BIPOC individual, how do you navigate the philanthropic field, which is historically old, wealthy, and white dominant? And how do you see this generation changing this field of philanthropy, if at all?
Ready for this? No.
I'm ready, Kathy.
That's a big question. Well, the one thing that gives me a lot of hope is that this generation is throwing out the rule book. I love that you all are coming in and challenging a lot of the legacy arbitrary rules that we have had in this sector for a very long time. I think, as someone who started working in philanthropy again, straight out of school, well, organized first, did work around environmental justice, and then, wound up at the City Foundation, not having ever stepped foot in a corporation to begin with. In fact, I graduated school at the height of Occupy Wall Street, so that should just give you a little bit of context around the space that I was arriving in. It is very isolating and almost just strange to be in that proximity to wealth and to power and to privilege, because there were moments where once I started my job at City, I would go back, to my, friends in organizing who were like, oh no, you work for the man now. You're in the ivory tower now. And so that means you and I have a very different relationship. And so you're navigating, when I say that you are navigating a lot of tension, particularly as a person of color in this sector, you really are. I think the other thing that for me was really difficult, and I'm not gonna lie, it still is sometimes really challenging, is that I was a grant maker working in the very communities that raised me, funding the very same organizations that I went to as a kid. And so there is no objectivity. It's really hard to be objective when your lived experience is a proposal. It's a piece of paper. And then if you are talking about it to the leadership, right, you have to, it's almost like you're pleading the case for why, pleading the case for your existence, which is really, really hard to have to do. And then we become numbers and outputs and percentages versus, an actual individual that, were it not for any of this programming, probably wouldn't be sitting here next to these incredible panelists. So I think that's, and again, I think, one of the things, Kevin, that you said about finding mentors and finding, and networking, I think that one of the things that really saved me and kept me in this sector for the last 12 years was finding my people. For me, it was incredible Black and brown women who kind of took me under their wing, and didn't let any of my sort of fiery spirit die down, but actually helped me figure out how to channel that in a way that really made a difference in the work. And so I would say that, I encourage, especially for the folks and BIPOC folks in this room, if you, and I highly encourage you to join the sector, because I think we need more of you and we need more of the rules thrown out the window. But I think that finding your people and finding people that will nurture your spirit and will really kind of make you feel seen and heard, especially in moments where you will often be made to feel like you're not, is going to be really important.
Yeah, this is a tough one. I'm going to try not to ramble, but agree with everything that you said, and I've experienced a lot of that. But I'll go more towards starting with just what's helped me sort of navigate that. And again, it really is people and relationships. I've just met specifically incredible Black women in philanthropy who have brought me in, and just been a space for me to feel heard and seen. I can talk in a different way that I need to talk to my other colleagues or white colleagues. And even just space to say, these white people are crazy, because sometimes they are, And being able to say that just like that can feel so liberating. I also have white colleagues that have been great too as well. But that's been huge. Also looking outside of philanthropy too, because you're not just limited to who you have right next to you in your cubicle or desk. There are fellowships, there are relationships with grantees, other nonprofit leaders, et cetera, who can be your people outside of your organization and can be a safe space for you, and advocates for you as you are for them. So yeah, I'll say that, but also happy to say more and go into more detail and more personally after this for anyone who's interested.
I guess that leaves me, and I think I would agree with everything that has been said. I also want to shout out the affinity group spaces in philanthropy. Specifically, nationally, there's Association for Black Foundation Executives, or ABFE. There are Hispanics in philanthropy. There are LGBTQI plus funders for and all of us are under an umbrella called Change Philanthropy, which hosts an every other year conference. I think that finding your people is the way to stay in this game, and also as marginalized, historically marginalized people in this field, it is critical. And these organizations were not founded out of like, everybody come together and create, let me open the door for you. They literally had to kick down the door in the case of APFI and at the Council of Foundations whenever they started many decades ago. They just had a milestone anniversary. I want to say it was 40 years, but 40th anniversary, I should know that. And so I think affinity groups and like-minded people are important. I also think that, to Kathy's very excellent point, we are working in partnership, right? Like, this isn't just like us giving money to these random nonprofits. Like, it is like, if you don't win, I don't win. And I don't mean that in my day job. I mean, like, no, you need to be successful at the thing that it is that you are purporting to do, and I want to help you do that so that we can all win as a people, as a society, as a community. So I think that's how I navigate it, like finding my people, just like they said, ensuring that the spaces that are for us remain vibrant spaces that tackle these issues, that help us put more tools in our toolbox when we get back to our day jobs so that we can do the thing that we came there to do, remembering our why. All of those things are what help me as a Black woman in this space.
That also, like, don't feel limited to what spaces are already there, or underestimate your own agency or the power of organizations, people, and systems to change and be transformed by those who are in the room. And so if there's not a space that you need, you can create that. And sometimes it's just as little as having lunch together, you know, and that can turn into more people there and becomes a whole group or initiative or something like that. Sometimes it may not go beyond that, and it's just something much more intimate, you know. But you have so much power to design that and create that, which is one of the things that philanthropy allows.
I want to say to the students, thank you for all of your questions that you sent in. I apologize that we didn't have time to get to all of them, but the questions are terrific. And the beautiful thing about this moment is that this is just the start, because you're going to have a chance in your rooms to ask these individuals the questions that you didn't get asked here, and also to have more specific conversations with them. And on that note, I just want to thank all four of you, Tawa, Meredith, Kathy, and Kevin. It's an incredibly rare moment where we get to sit down and have these types of conversations with people who are making such a difference in the field, and who not just think it, but also live it. And we really benefit and are thankful for your willingness to take time out of your lives and out from your families and to share your brilliance with us. And so just thank you again, and thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you.